Training well isn't always about training hard, it's about training smart. Using heart rate zones is a great way to tailor your training program. In this video, we're going to explain when and how to train with heart rate and the benefits it can give you. A lot of athletes are guilty of spending too much time in what I call the moderate grey zone, working moderately hard most of the time in a limited range of effort. Training to heart rate and using the correct zones will prevent that dreaded performance plateau and enable you to take your running to the next level. Running to heart rate also allows you to run at a more continuous effort compared to trying to run at a set pace. For example, if you hit an incline like this and you try and maintain that pace you had on the flat, then your heart rate will increase and you'll probably find you're training in a different zone to what your session required. And then the opposite goes for running downhill. First, you need to work out your heart rate zones, and it's important to note that these will be specific to running, so you'll need to do a separate test and calculate specifically for cycling as well. So we've already made a video on how to find your heart rate and calculate your zones, and if you do need help with this, the video is in the description below. Now, I personally used a 25-minute cross-country race where I was running as hard as I could to my average heart rate from that to work out my lactate threshold heart rate, and then I used an online calculator to work out my zones, and that's the most accurate way of doing it. So for the purpose of today, we're going to use a more simple calculation when you take your resting heart rate and your maximum heart rate. And to keep things really straightforward, we're going to use a heart rate maximum of 200 for today's calculations. Okay, before we get started, it's worth noting that there are a few factors that can cause your heart rate to differ from the normal. For example, an increase in temperature, something as small as 5 degrees centigrade, can cause your heart rate to rise by as much as 10 beats per minute. Now, dehydration can also cause your heart rate to rise, as can altitude, as well as caffeine, whereas fatigue can sometimes cause your heart rate to be lower. Therefore, it's worth being aware of your perceived effort in combination and not being a slave to your heart rate if the conditions have changed. Finally, note that there'll be a lag in the time for your heart rate to react to the change in effort. So if you're wanting to run at zone 4 pace, to start with, you'll need to use perceived effort, as your heart rate will take a minute or two to reflect this. Another way of doing it is if you're running on the flat and you've got GPS, you can run to pace. There are 5 zones and they all have a different purpose and a different training effect. Zone 1 is 100 to 120 beats per minute, and that's about 50 to 60% of your maximum effort. This is super easy and you should feel like you're hardly working at all, and you might even wonder why it's worth running at this pace. You can make it social, so go out with friends, and it shouldn't feel like a training session. It's all about recovery and just flushing out your legs, and zone 1 is so often overlooked, but it's important that you recover if you're going to actually get any stronger. Another option is to swap it for a bike or a run, but whatever you do, just make sure that your effort level is only at about 4 out of 10. Zone 2 is working at about 120 to 140 beats per minute, 60 to 70% of your maximum heart rate. We're staying in the aerobic zone here, so it's moderately light training, but it is a step up from zone 1. So your effort levels would be around a 5 or 6 out of 10. Now, you'll spend the majority of your running training in this zone if you're training for triathlon. An example would be your 1 hour long run, and to know that you're on the right track with perceived effort, being able to hold a conversation very comfortably. Now, a lot of athletes will use this for pre-season training and also for fat loss, as it is low-level aerobic miles. Zone 3 is 140 to 160 beats per minute, or 70 to 80% of your maximum heart rate. This zone is used less commonly when you're training to heart rate, as it can be labelled that grey area that athletes will slip into, where you're not working hard enough to push up your lactate threshold, but you're working too hard to be purely developing your aerobic base. And as a result, you'll still need adequate levels of recovery from this type of training, but you might not receive the same levels of gains. That said, your coach might set zone 3 work early on in your base training, as it does help to build muscular endurance and can also make your body more efficient. So for example, if you're training for a half marathon, then a good session would be 2 lots of 15 minutes holding zone 3. And to give you an idea, that would be around a 7 out of 10 effort-wise, and you should be able to only hold short sentences when talking. Zone 4 is 160 to 180 beats per minute, or 80 to 90% of your maximum heart rate. This is where the hard work happens. You're going to be working at around an 8 out of 10, and it's not going to feel comfortable, but you will be improving your lactate threshold and your speed endurance as you'll be staying in your threshold. Now, it isn't comfortable, and I promise you, you'll be counting down the minutes to the end of each rep. But a good set to try this out would be 4 lots of 5 minutes with a 3-minute recovery between each. Zone 4 is essential if you want to get any faster. Now, if you are training for a sprint or an Olympic distance race, then you'll find yourself training pretty close to your race pace with this type of session. However, if you are aiming at a longer race, then this will be quicker than your race pace. Zone 5 is 180 beats plus per minute, or 90 to 100% of your maximum heart rate. You're not going to be able to stay here long, nor will you need to. It's basically a 10 out of 10 effort, so well above your lactate threshold. And it is all out. But the lactic acid will soon catch up with you, and it'll prevent your muscles from working very soon. This type of training is only really needed if you're expecting to have a sprint finish, or you're entering pure running races where you might require a real kick at the end. And it's worth noting that by the time your heart rate shows your max, your legs will have probably already failed you. On the plus side, you might be pleased to hear that the majority of triathletes don't need to train in this zone, but you might find yourself just dipping into it if you're doing some warm-up strides or some pre-race lengtheners. Just always make sure that your legs are 100% warmed up before running at maximum effort. Incorporating heart rate as a measure for your training will help keep your effort specific to each particular training session. However, if you are still loyal to pace, why not try combining the two, and then you've got double the amount of feedback. Now, if you like the look of this GTN jacket, there's plenty more kit like this on the shop. Just click on the link, and you can subscribe to GTN by clicking on the globe. Now, if you're new to heart rate running and you want a little bit more of an explainer of how to find your heart rate and how to use a heart rate monitor, then we've made a video just here. And if you wanted to lose some weight and combine it with your training for triathlon, then there's a great video for that just here.